please give a huge round of applause to Peter Green.
Would it interest you to know that you could increase the performance of your teams right now by understanding more about how the brain works? In the next 20 minutes, you will learn a little bit about me and how I came to be here today talking to you about the brain. We'll also learn some interesting and useful knowledge about the brain. And you'll also have 3 things that you can take away and implement immediately in order to start improving the performance of your team. But first, let me take you back in time to 1978. Oh, sorry, that's a bit too far. To 1978. I'd started work for a few years and I was working for an electronics company. I'd actually been quite good. I'd become a senior engineer and I'd started to get an informal leadership role, organising people and things, and I quite liked it. So I thought, I'm going to make a career change. I'm going to find out what opportunities there are for me to get into management, because frankly, some of the managers weren't that good. So I booked an appointment with the operations director, Charlie Wilson, an appointment to see him. And as I was walking through the corridor, the lino changed to carpet as I went up to the 4th floor and entered the front of his office. His secretary said, "Mr. Wilson will see you now." The butterflies in my stomach were doing somersaults. My heart was pounding. I'd never asked anything like this before. So I went in, knocked on the door, "Come in." Sat down. Big leather chair in front of Charlie's desk. "Hello, Peter. What can I do for you?" I said, trying to keep those butterflies from flying out my mouth. I said, "Well, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, Charlie." And because it was first name terms, that was quite good for that organisation. "I'm quite enjoying what I'm doing as an informal leader, and I'd like to pursue a career in management. And I just want to know, what are the opportunities for me here in this business?" Charlie was a dapper little man, about that high, 3-piece suit, little moustache, bouffant hair. And he stroked his moustache, put his hands behind his head and leaned back in his chair. I'll come back to that story in a minute. But first of all, I'd quite like to find out if you can work out a few more things about me as a person. So I have 3 truths and 1 lie on that board there. And I'm just going to do a very quick little straw poll to find out which ones you think is the lie. So those at the back, they have, first one up there is that I've done an extreme bungee jump. The second one there is that I poured gunge over senior directors of a company that I worked for. The third one there is that I used to play in a rock band. And the fourth one is that I've jumped out of a plane at 10,000 feet. So let's just take a quick straw poll. Who thinks number 1 is the lie? Okay, about a few there. Who thinks number 2 is a lie? Okay, who thinks number 3 is a lie? And who thinks number 4 is a lie? Yes, not Fleetwood Mac. No, it's not Fleetwood Mac. Oh, we've got quite mixed in the room. There we go then. So, well, there you go. That picture up in the top left-hand corner is me in a rock band with a sequined boiler suit back in 1976, playing in an open-air festival.
What happened?
Yeah, I'd had my hair cut then as well. The one on the right top there, that was in fact me gunging the senior directors of a business. I didn't get sacked because it was all in aid of comic relief. We raised loads of money. That one there is me jumping out of a plane from 10,000 feet, doing a free fall parachute jump. The one that was the lie was the bungee jump. Yay. And why was it a lie? Because I would never submit my brain to that kind of pressure so that it gets squashed into the top of my skull and a desire to burst out because I value it too much, because it is a very special instrument. Well, Peter, it's like this, he said. It's a bit like dead man's shoes around here. What do you mean, Charlie? Well, unless anybody dies, there isn't really any opportunities to move into any of those roles. What a thing to say. I thought it was quite valuable to that business. I was out of that company like a speeding bullet because they weren't interested in my development. And we might consider the impact of what Charlie said there in the rest of the context of my talk today. So, started my career in leadership. I went to another company, I joined as a leader and a manager, and I started growing as a leader and a manager. I worked through the organization into senior roles, and then I became a trainer of other managers, helping them to drive the performance of their teams. And during that time, I became interested in the brain, because we were given training around psychology, why some things worked. And I kept that with me all the way through for 25 years. And when I left and set up my own business, I rekindled my interest in the brain. Neuroscience was beginning to rise in the interest of leaders and management because certain neuroscientists were doing research, not just in the technical side of the brain, but how the brain affects this in social situations, particularly as leaders. People like this guy here, Matt Lieberman, who is one of the many outstanding neuroscientists who've done work in this area. And some of the information I'm going to share with you today is based on his research, because I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do study it and research what the real neuroscientists have done. And it was the work that he did around leadership that really inspired me about the brain. So why did I call it limbic leadership? Well, let's do a little bit of a brain anatomy lesson. I always bring my brain with me because I find it useful to keep my brain with me, and I have a spare one here. And the thing about the brain, just as an aside before we do the evolution, it's amazing. The most powerful supercomputer known to mankind in 3.5 pounds of mush. Each one of you at this moment has around 1 trillion synapses happening in your heads and enough electricity to power a small light bulb. But let's get back to the evolution. What happened was that we had 3 parts to the brain evolve. The first was the brain stem, sometimes called the reptilian brain. This is the part of the brain that just enabled us to survive as an animal. It's very instinctive, very raw, very basic. In fact, they do say that when people get drunk, seriously drunk, you may have seen some of the people in the streets that I'm sure aren't in this room today, the only thing left to them working is their reptilian brain. In other words, they will fight anything that comes near them, or they will go forth and multiply with anything that comes near them. Are the only 2 basic instincts left. The third part of the brain to evolve is this top part that we know here called the neocortex, and most importantly the front bit, the prefrontal cortex. This is where conscious thought happens. It allows us to have this conversation here today. But the bit I'm interested in is the bit that was second to evolve, which is the limbic system. Why is this most important? The limbic system controls our emotions. It determines our state, how we feel, and therefore, very often, how we behave. The things that we do are driven right down by emotions. So if this is something that we can influence, we immediately put ourselves in a stronger position in terms of building relationships and getting people to work with us. And there's something else that's very unusual about this system. Every other system in the body and the brain is closed loop. That means nothing can influence it apart from what's going on in the body. So your heartbeat, your blood pressure, all of those thousands of factors that are being controlled are closed loop. The limbic system, however, is open loop. That means today. But the bit I'm interested in is the limbic system, your limbic system, and your limbic system. By the things that I do and say will make you feel in a certain way, and you will affect me. This creates what I call the limbic loop. And the limbic loop is something that's really important for us to consider. In fact, in this room, there is a limbic soup, as all of our limbic systems are interacting together. So what, you may say? How does that affect me as a leader and my ability to drive performance? Well, some of you may be aware of a company called Gallup, who've been studying employee engagement. And as leaders, I'm sure you're aware that employee engagement is something that we strive to aim for, to drive up in our teams. But why would we want to do that? Well, Gallup have found through over 15 years of research and hundreds of thousands of companies that engaged employees perform significantly better than those that aren't engaged. In fact, the statistics are amazing. Highly engaged teams can produce 21% more productivity. How would you like to have some of that? Or profitability in businesses up by 22%. These are validated statistics by the Gallup organization in their most recent survey in 2013. Absence down by 37% and safety incidents down by 48%. How many of you would like some of that in your business? So what is this engagement? What is an engaged employee? Well, Gallup have helped us with that as well. And they've discovered that there are two connections that an employee has with a business. They have an emotional connection and they have a rational connection. Both of them will affect how engaged they are. And you might think to yourself, maybe that's equal balance. Maybe both of them are equal. But what Gallup have found is that by far the emotional connection that they have with the business outweighs the rational connection. Yes, my friends, the emotional connection is key. So how can we, as leaders, influence the emotional connection that our teams have with the business? In Gallup's research, it's down to the leader. 80% of how engaged the employee is will be down to how the leader behaves, which brings us right back to why. And it's all to do with the limbic system, how your employee feels. And by the way, if you don't like people, it's going to be really difficult to be a great leader. It's got to be a two-way street. So what do we know about this? Let's look at some of the research that's been done around neuroscience. It's been discovered that inside our limbic system, we have something similar to the fight or flight mechanism going. How many of you are familiar with fight or flight? Yeah, this is the basic response at an emotional level, but there's a much more subtle activity going on almost constantly through the limbic system. Do I feel slightly threatened around this topic, or do I feel slightly rewarded? Different circuits in the brain will light up. And as a leader, we want to minimize threat and maximize reward. So you might be asking, well, what are the areas that we have to focus on, Peter? I can tell you, because the research has done that for us. There are 5 key factors that we can influence as a leader: human connection, status, certainty, freedom, and equity. I'm going to cover 3 of those and give you some tips around what you can do to drive the improvement on the reward side of your teams around each of those. So human connection. We evolved as a species that relied on connection. We evolved in small little clans way, way back, long before we were as intelligent as we are now. Having a connection with the people around you is inbuilt. It's a need that we have. Know, like, and trust is a common phrase we hear these days. And any stranger in town who didn't seem like us was veered with rejection, wasn't trusted. So what can you do as a leader? Well, if you're robotic, if your connection with someone is purely transactional, how many of these widgets have we done? How much of that have we done? If it's just all business, you will never build a human connection. In fact, you will be maximizing a little bit of a threat response in the individual. So one of my first tips that can build the ability to build stronger relationships with your team is be human and not a robot. Some of you may say, well, surely that's obvious. In my experience with the leaders I work with, it's not obvious. There seems to be some barrier that stops us connecting with people. Talk about things, make time to talk about things that are not work-related. Make time to share maybe some of your likes and dislikes. Because when you do that, you will relate to that person on a human level. And it won't break any of your authority, but it might drive a stronger performance from the individual. The second one I'll have a look at is status. Any idea what we mean by status? Who?
Respect.
Respect, yes. As a status, we like to know where we are. We like to feel that we are of relevant importance and not felt that we're being put down. Many managers mistakenly believe that, for instance, giving feedback, helping somebody to see where they need to improve. Steve, if you could just do this, it's not working like this, you need to improve that. This is coming from a best intent in place, but the impact of continuously telling someone where they're not doing so well is actually reducing their feeling of status. And they'll be moving towards a threat response rather than a reward. So what could you do? Catch people doing things right. This isn't rocket science, it's neuroscience. It sounds so simple. It sounds so simple, and yet it's not done enough. We wait until we formally sit down to tell somebody how good they've done in a particular project. Well, what about all the little things they've done along the way? This is a really powerful way of helping someone see what they're doing that's working well. Small little positive interventions, and maybe give them a little responsibility to train others, raises their status. There was some research done at the West Michigan University of high-performing organizations, specifically focusing on what was the feedback, what kind of feedback in this organization took place. And in the most successful organizations, they found there was a 4-to-1 ratio of positive feedback versus negative feedback. Something to think about. How can you implement that structure within your team? What changes would you have to make? And the third one I'm going to cover off today is equity. We have an inbuilt need to feel that things are right and just. Just think about what people do in the cause of justice. When they feel so strongly about an injustice in the world, some people will actually even die for it. The important thing here is to ensure that your team know what decisions are being made and why. They don't believe that you've made a decision here and they fill the gap thinking you've done it for one reason and that might be excluding them. Make sure you communicate. If people know why decisions are made, then you will have people on your side. You won't have them filling it with false assumptions of unfairness. So to summarize, the limbic system determines behaviors. If you can master the skills of limbic leadership, you'll minimize the threats and maximize the rewards. And the key thing is, above all, to be human. If anyone would like, I've got 7 disastrous mistakes that leaders make as a PDF. I shall leave a clipboard over on the table there during the breaks. Please sign up there and I'll send you the free PDF. Thank you.